started?
Yeah.
Recording is back in progress. Right. On to item 5, looking at pillar 1 of the police and crime plan, sustaining Norfolk Constabulary. The report in the papers begins at page 22. Chief, who would you like to lead on this?
Peter Jasper's going to cover this.
Please. So, Commissioner, I'll keep the introduction brief to the paper because the papers have been circulated in advance. The Pillar 1 report contains the usual updates regarding Sustain Norfolk Constabulary, includes updates on estates, finance, ICT, appeal inspection, HMIC, and the usual updates in that paper. Of note, it does include the financial outturn report for 22-23, including the recommended final reserve movements within that part of the report. Just in summary, in terms of the outturn position, the group overspends, so that includes the OPCC, the commissioning spends and the constabulary spends as well, was 241,000 overspent, which was 0.12% of the total budget. So a modest overspend. And we did report previously that there was pressures from utilities as well as higher than expected pay settlements that came throughout the year. So I think in terms of the small overspend, it's less than 1% of the budget. We did remarkably well to manage that in that regard.
And we've discussed this outside this forum, and I have now signed off the movement of reserves to cover it.
Yes, thank you for that. So that was just the brief introduction, the highlights on the financial element of it, and open up to questions.
I'm not going to ask anything on the money side. I do have a question on the Peel reports going back to last October. For those following the papers, the grades set out at page 26. But can I just ask for a sort of mid-year update on an overview, if you like, on progress on the 11 areas for improvement?
I'll probably take that one back to myself if I may, Commissioner. Lucy has kindly put a slide together, but I recognise that that's quite tricky to read from afar. On the slide, though, we list the 11 AFIs that the constabulary has. I should note at the outset, actually quite a low number for a constabulary to have compared to many of our peers, but it's inevitable that forces will have areas for improvements listed when inspected. I'll try and rattle through these in reasonable speed, given the number. First one states that the force needs to make sure that officers properly record their grounds for stop and search. Since our report, we've carried out extensive training. We've provided some new guidance to officers, which has completely changed the way in which they are now recording the grounds for their stop and search. You might recall from the report that the inspectors found no issue when they looked at the video footage of our stop and search. It was just how those grounds were recorded. We've carried out audits and continue to carry out audits, which now find that were our stop and searches to be inspected by the inspectorate, that we would probably find ourselves being graded around good for that. So we think that we've made some positive progress on that. The next FI concerned problem-solving plans. We were asked to see whether they could be managed centrally with further assessment and evaluation. We have made the required changes. Problem-solving advisors now have greater involvement with the management and assessment of problem-solving plans, and we now do not allow a plan to be closed unless opportunities for learning have been identified, recorded and shared. So we are optimistic that that is now addressed. Next one concerns call centres. The force should make sure that call handlers use and correctly record structured initial triage and risk assessments aside and call prioritisation and the most appropriate response. We've put in place the changes within our systems, within our control rooms, to make sure that that assessment is now mandated, and every 24 hours a report is generated which highlights any of our calls that slip that net, so that we pick them up, but they are few and far between. I should add just on this point that the more time you spend on a call, you have a commensurate reduction in your capacity to take more calls. And for all of the right reasons, there have been a number of recommendations made of call centres in recent years, which have seen the amount of time that we're spending on the phone to callers grow and grow and grow. And without further investment in the control room or further funding from central government, it does follow that the more time we spend on an individual call, there will be a commensurate impact on our 101 performance. It's not to say I don't think this recommendation is right and valid, but adhering to the recommendations of the HMI does have an impact elsewhere within the organisation. Next one, please, Lucy. Number 4, that the force should make sure that repeat callers and vulnerable victims are routinely identified. We are now carrying out audit work to ensure that that indeed does take place. Again, further training of our control room staff. Again, further questions to be asked. Again, lengthening of the call, but we are doing it. The 5th one, the force needs to make sure that call takers give appropriate advice on crime prevention and the preservation of evidence. Very similar response. We've provided the additional training. We've changed our processes to make sure that that occurs. We're carrying out audits. Again, it is lengthening the amount of time that we are spending on the phone, but we are doing it. Next relates to investigation of crime. The force should reassess the training and direction it is given to improve supervision and investigation quality. We are ensuring that our sergeants are aware of core minimum standards. We have developed what I think are the best in class when it comes to data insights, dashboards available to our supervisors. That improvement is currently seeing Norfolk Constabulary as having the 2nd highest detection rate in the country, which I think is an output that we should be very proud of. I do see lots of commentary about police detection rates, much of that challenge being very fair, but as of last month we were 2nd best in the country. That in part is because we've established dedicated district crime units to enable closer scrutiny of investigations and to ensure that we're better supporting victims. More training on top of that. I think we're making some very solid progress on this AFI. The next one relates to, still with investigating crime, relates to the Victims Code. Again, using data insights to help better understand where we're complying and where we're not, and to ensure that management intervention takes place. So that is also on track. AFI 8 is very much linked to 7, and I'll just say that it's the same response. AFI 9, here the HMI said that the force should make sure that ancillary orders such as domestic violence protection notices are considered in appropriate cases. We're exploring the best use of DVPNs, as we call them, through some research. Our findings actually support our existing practice, which is that they are most effective when those orders are used at the cases where the individual is at most at risk. I think the effectiveness of the order is limited if they are liberally used in a non-targeted way, and it's not an efficient use of our resource to overuse them, nor is it any good for the good to the victim. We are nonetheless reviewing our policy when we close cases to see if a order is appropriate, and our domestic abuse perpetrator team are actively reviewing cases to see if they're suitable for stalking protection orders, and to offer, if that's not the case, what other support they can offer to victims. Further training has been offered, and our legal services department particularly help with the training to our officers in that regard. But we do believe orders should only be used when it's the right time to do so. 10th AFI, the force should make sure that officers are aware of their safeguarding responsibilities beyond initial safeguarding. Training in domestic abuse linked to change in our risk assessment process is highlighting to officers relevant risk factors for them to be aware of. We've changed the plan, as I mentioned earlier, when we close investigations, so that we are putting in place greater consideration of the victim's need when we close down cases. So we making good progress on that AFI. And then number 11, the force should review its capacity to manage the risk posed by registered sex offenders. The number of registered sex offenders in the county is growing every year. It's growing because we are catching more offenders, and those offenders are living longer. And whilst they're on the sex offenders register, there's a duty for the police to manage them. We have committed additional resources to that problem, so that our public protection unit has more capacity to visit those offenders, but it's a growing demand area where in time I think we will have to put more in, unless there's a lightening up of the requirements to visit sex offenders, which is probably somewhere where we wouldn't want to go anyway. So that's it in terms of the Peel report that was published last year, but you'll be aware that subsequent to that there's been a report from the Inspectorate into our response to serious and organised crime. That is a more recent report. I probably won't go through the 4 AFIs in such detail because they're still quite hot off the press, if that's okay, Commissioner. But suffice to say, I'm reassured that we're making good progress on them.
And I have a Section 55 response to add to the stock report, which I've got in draft, and I'm grateful for some input that Lucy King has sent to me for that. So that will be completed shortly. Moving on then. This is very loosely derived from page 25 and associated bullet about sickness absence, but it's about assaults on officers. And I wondered if you'd give me an overview on the position on assaults on officers, numbers or percentages being assaulted, the effects it's having both on the force and obviously on individual officers.
May I take that, Commissioner?
Of course.
Well, for the calendar year 2022, we recorded 822 investigations as a consequence of assaults, and they range from the assault by beating of a constable all the way up to and including GBH with intent, Section 18. Of those, the vast majority end up clearly in some sort of sanction for the individual. Of course, we take little tolerance of people assaulting constables in the exercise of their duty. So most do get charged to attend court, but there are others where, due to the nature and clearly being considerate of the individuals, that some do get cautions and the like. Of that number, and a number of our police officers do end up, unfortunately, in hospital. And not quite the majority, but the issues when we go to hospital predominantly relate to being spat at. So individuals who are spat at, either being spat at in their eyes or spat at in their mouths, require the intervention of the medics. But equally, and you know, it's certainly within the chief's mind and others, when we're on call, having officers that do attend hospitals as a consequence of quite serious assaults, and we will of course ensure that their welfare is addressed. Just conscious of the time, but clearly we have a full wraparound, which we call on-hand share, in terms of supported by the Federation to ensure that we have a full welfare provision related to individuals, be that through their first line and then subsequent line management from where they work, as well as support from their health and well-being to ensure that any longer term, be it physical or in some cases psychological issues, are addressed, and we provide the right sort of support for individuals.
But with a touch over 1,800 officers in the force, 822 assaults, is basically more than a third of the force gets assaulted each year, or there are some officers who get assaulted a significant number of times each year, because inevitably it's the people on the front line.
Indeed so, Commissioner, indeed so, more than 2 a day.
Okay. Sorry, Commissioner, just and police staff as well.
Yes.
Particularly in our custody suites, where we have custody detention officer, police staff.
And they're included in the 822.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just for clarity. Yeah. And are you content that officers, the force, are getting the support they should from the courts in terms of sentences? I'm mindful that the Home Secretary increased the sentencing guidelines, or sentences available and sentencing guidelines for assaults on emergency services workers. Is that being applied?
Well, of course, we welcome the seriousness that the Home Secretary and by implication the state take in terms of supporting our officers. What probably wouldn't want to be drawn on, because clearly it's a judgment made on each and every case by the magistrates predominantly, so probably wouldn't want to be drawn on specifics. But what I would say generally, that actually it's unacceptable to assault members of the police officers or the police staff, and we welcome severe and detrimental punishment that can prevent further assaults. So I wouldn't, as I say, not specifically, but do welcome the strength that the magistrates and the judges have to provide sanction.
Yes, we are involved in separation of powers here, so we can't direct in any way or whatever.
I wouldn't want to
Get that. Okay, I think that's all I've got on Pillar 1. Just looking up down the table, is there anything else that anyone wants to bring out? Nothing from the board? Okay, let's move on to item 6, Pillar 2 of the plan, visible and trusted policing. Would you like to lead on this, board?
May I take that as well? Assuming that everyone's read the paper, may I just draw attendees' attention to 2, 3, 4 points that I want to raise? Which is a clearly important issue for us, the public's perception on the police doing an excellent or good job. It's something that I certainly track through the force performance meeting. You will note in the paper that for the previous 12 months, and this is up to March of this year, so the previous 12 months it was 86%. The last 12 months it was 85%. Now you might think it's sort of peculiar that I'm highlighting a 1 point decrease, but when you consider the year that policing has had nationally, when you consider the exposure that the police have nationally, comments made in Parliament, the Home Secretary's position, and in fact only yesterday a big piece certainly in the BBC around the management of those individuals that need to be removed from the organisation. I think the quote's up to 2,000 officers need to be removed. I think the fact that we've held steady public perception here in Norfolk is testament to the men and the women that go out day in, day out, ambassadorially deliver policing, good service. The Chief's already mentioned how we investigate crime, but I think that's the first point I'd like to make, that we are holding steady. That said, of course, we're not we're not relaxed about that, and if there are any changes, we respond fairly quickly to ensure that we maintain that confidence, because we do know that a confident public supports policing, therefore we're able to support our public. The Chief's already mentioned our position nationally around our overall detection or outcome rates. We are second in the country. The Chief didn't mention that the one at the top happens to be the City of London. Not wishing to cast any criticism on the City of London, but the City of London is it is unique. It's a square mile. Its population is as unusual for policing. So I would suggest that the position that we take, because we are a more normal constabulary, is significant, and we are doing particularly well. We talked about processes, and the Chief mentioned district crime units, but I think also it's very much the focus on crime investigations, something the Chief has raised throughout. I'll raise one more point because I am conscious of time, but that point around 999s that are raised in the paper. Over the last 12 months, we've seen an accelerating rate, particularly over the last 3 months. In fact, some of the highest numbers we've ever had. We used to use the benchmark of New Year's Eve. The benchmark of New Year's Eve is now lost, because day by day we are hitting that sort of number and beyond. And you'll have seen in the press not a week or so ago that failures around that 999 system, partly due to these volumes that are coming through and ending up on our desks. That clearly has implications on our 101s, but again, we're not allowing our 101 performance to be lost. We are tracking and monitoring, but of course we need to maintain that. And it is a high intensity service. We hit regularly 90% of all calls picked up within 10 seconds. Of course, that means we need a lot of call handlers and call handlers ready, which has that drawing effect of taking call handlers from the routine through 101. We do though know that we have to have a 999 channel that's clear of silt and able to be picked up very, very quickly. But I just want to raise that because, as the Chief mentioned, in May we were the highest nationally again in terms of our pickup rates. I'll pause there on that.
I was going to ask about 999 calls. I mean, first of all, am I right in my impression that pre-pandemic, and going back to when I was a candidate for this role, the daily average was around the 250 mark? That last year, between May and August bank holidays, you were going through the 500 mark, yes. And that this year you've been going through the 600 mark?
Yes, at the peaks, in terms of the peaks that we hit, it's unprecedented. It's almost unrecognisable. And as I say, the fact that we have to have call handlers ready to be able to pick up a call within 10 seconds means that you don't have the opportunity, as you do with 101s, to manage them in a more balanced way. What I would say though, I know your point is around 999s, just to give you some confidence that as a consequence of the constabulary moving into quite an innovative process and using new technology for our 101s, unlike many, at the point that they come into our switchboard, which gets picked up very, very quickly, we triage at that particular point, work out where the risks are. If it's a particularly risky call, i.e. the equivalent of the 999, it gets channeled into that stream straight away. If not, we then channel between public safety, roads, domestic abuse, crime, and then put them into channels that allow us to better manage our 101s against risk. So we don't have, where some do, something that's glowing red hot in the system that's 6, 8, 10 callers back. We've already assessed that. And in most parts, actually, our switchboard are able to deal. Those that they can't, they're able then to screen against risk.
And the numbers I was just describing, are those all 999 calls, or are those the ones that you respond to? I'm just thinking about the nuisance calls, the accidental calls.
The numbers that I've quoted are all 999 calls. Yeah. So that's the 999 calls that come in.
That's total coming in.
Of course, yeah. Of which about a third become translated into response. And not all of those are responded to as an emergency blue light response. Many clearly are, but not all of them. And of course, we want people to make the right decisions. We don't criticise when somebody's concerned. It is crime in action or somebody's at risk. It's really a 999 call. We get much more than that within that 500 as you quoted up and beyond. We then are able to filter some of that appropriately.
And it's all Norfolk, or do we get some spillover from other forces?
Well, it's a point well made, quite properly, that if you're a member of the public almost anywhere, and you ring 999, and that the BT operator has deemed it a police call, that you are expecting somebody to pick that up fairly promptly, and we would, as a service nationally, expect it to do that. Because we are particularly good, we don't export, but we do import. So, without going into too many details around the numbers, yeah. 200 to 300 a month, so we're probably taking almost a day's worth, beyond sometimes, of other people's calls into our call handling system, just because they bounce out of a neighbouring force or further afield, where they're not being picked up, and they're not being picked up after a number of minutes. So there is a clear and critical need for somebody to pick them up. And we quite properly step into that space, but it does cost us, because it costs us our call handlers predominantly against our 101 metrics that we measure against their work.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's all I've got on that. Any other shouts from the floor?
Commissioner, can I just add, of course, that an increase, it doesn't follow that an increase in 999 or indeed other calls means an increase in crime at the same rate. Indeed, what we're increasingly finding is a call type that we call concerns safety is one of the growth areas. That is one of the things that we hope in part will be addressed by the right care, right person approach. But a significant amount of that demand is ours. If I give an example, yesterday morning in the Norwich district, so Norwich District Council boundaries, the team came on to 10 missing persons just within the Norwich City district, which there's often a view that that everything to do with policing is crime. But what we're increasingly finding is it's those other areas of responsibility that we have that's taken up a significant amount of time. And where one of those missing persons is, let's say, for example, high risk, I can pretty much chuck a whole team at that and they might well be gone for the day. And we are seeing particular increase in that sort of call. Our problem is it's not the quick to deal with calls that are going up. It's quite often the more resource intensive and more complex ones, such as missing persons. But I did want to say it doesn't follow more calls equals more crime.
Can I just add a further point? When I talk about 101, we are, of course, not just allowing that's spillover, that drawing of resources to 999 just to allow our 101s to slip. We are operating in contingency, so we are ensuring that we bring additional resources to support that 101 because clearly the public still do need something from us. We are moving to the single online home provision the latter part of the summer, which gives members of the public far greater digital access to the service, of which we will be sharing some of the information around that as it comes online, which we hope, in terms of from a public perspective, gives people the options, but also helps us manage some of the flows. So again, we aren't sitting on our hands. We are using technology and we are bringing in these resources.
Grant, thank you. Right, so move on to item 7, pillar 3, tackling crime. You leading again, sorry?
I am. I'm assuming that people have had an opportunity to read the paper, if I may. Just draw out 2 or 3 quick points. We just want to raise that domestic abuse positive outcomes going up, very much driving the overall arrest rate. So we've talked about arrest rates more generally. Our HMI CFRS colleagues made mention of it some time ago. We have been pushing quite hard using arrest properly and proportionately, but using arrest both as safeguarding and an investigative tool. So you'll see arrests going up and our DA positive rates going up. And to the point being made earlier, understanding our data sets. So the Chief referenced earlier the work that's been going on in the background in Ralph's team and in other places to really ensure that we have data provision to the right people at the right time has allowed us to understand in much more granular detail, which has allowed us to focus on those that have got the opportunities to be solved and very much working on that. I'll pause there because we don't want to. Okay. If I might just talk about serious and organised crime. Of course, we've just again mentioned the HMI inspection. Our disruptions are up. Again, as described in our response to HMI, the way that we measured our disruptions and the way that they measured it, the disruptions were slightly different, but we are pushing our disruption activity up fairly significantly. And again, that overall view on serious and organised crime, and then leading over into what we've been absolutely focusing on, our county lines activity and the disruptions and dismantlement and the removal of county lines coming into this county has been substantial. And that's where a lot of our effort has been, not least because we know, the Chief and our organisation knows, that's where the harm, significant harm, very visible significant harm comes from. And that's why we've spent a significant amount of our focus and resource on making, I don't want to take but making it really quite a hostile environment to export your criminality and bring it into Norfolk. So work with this is not least Metropolitan Police. And my last point, I have a number of others, but I'll just draw stumps at my last point around our focus on rape. Very much lots of talk around Soteria, the Operation Soteria. And if you've read the letters from Home Secretary and others, very keen on Soteria. We do apply, to be very clear, we do apply the Soteria principles in the constabulary, particularly working very hard on engagement with victims. So we've set up an engagement team where enhanced skills, ability and time to really focus on victims, support, nurture and ensure that they feel safe within the environment. Clearly one of the key principles of Soteria. And it's clear that that's reaping some benefits. Of course, we know nationally where the rape detections are. Our rape detection is certainly going up, and I was looking at month-on-month rape detections. They are now into double figures for us, but on a month-by-month basis rather than average. We still want more, but we're working very, very hard around response to rape in this county.
Yes, very good stuff there. Funny enough, having just been through the Norfolk show, my eye was drawn to, and I'm on page 49 if anyone wants to look at the table, the figures on hair coursing, down 30.3% over the last 12 months, 52.4% against the long-term average. And given that we've had the Norfolk show, 60% of our population lives in the rural areas, it's very easy, and we've majored a certain amount on urban issues so far. I just wonder whether you can expand on what's contributed to that success and whether there's stuff there that can cross-pollinate other rural crime times.
Well, of course, Commissioner, and that was one of my final points to raise, but you kind of mentioned it in your questions. Well, the hair coursing reduction is a clear success for us, and part of that is I think we're pathfinders, but we're working in collaboration. We know that particularly with hair coursing, you can't work in isolation. So we've worked collaboratively across the 7 forces. So whether that's with Cambridgeshire, whether that's with Suffolk or even further afield, and targeting courses with civil legislation, that via community protection orders and community protection notices. And we are particularly strong on the network of farmers and others in the rural communities talking to us now. Without drifting too far off, I happened to have been out myself fairly recently with one of our number of rural crime team officers who are focused and trained and skilled to respond to rural crime. Having been out with him, we went around a number of farms, spoke to a number of farmers, farm workers, all got connections, all got networks to relay information really very quickly. We're able then to respond, and we're able then to give that sort of support and be quite stringent. We enforce the law, whether that's seizing vehicles, seizing dogs, making it hostile, and then pursuing through the courts. And I think you picked up on, was it Springwatch or Sunwatch or whatever it was. We happened to be, there was an article on Springwatch, I think, with one of our local, on the national TV. One of our
yes, I saw it, yes.
Yeah. I thought it was a great article, a real standout in terms of what we're doing to support the rural community and enforce rural crime. So yeah, we're very pleased with that, and it's not something we're going to take our eye off. It's one of those things where you have to maintain your presence and your focus.
Thank you. Anything else on that agenda item? On board. Rolling on. Item 8, preventing offending.
Thank you. So I'll pick up 3 highlights around the Prevent Offending paper. So the first will be around the Integrated Offender Manager Scheme, which is continuing its great work with partners. So that's supporting a cohort of broadly 130 to 150 people. Of the 19 people who came off the scheme in this reporting period, they saw a 71% reduction in their crime harm score compared with their year in the community prior to joining the scheme. So clearly some rehabilitation there. But on the other hand, within the cohort, 22% were charged with further offences, and 1 in 5 had breach action taken against them by the probation service, because it is very much a partnership approach, but just emphasising the close monitoring of a prolific cohort. The second bit I'll just draw on would be the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Partnership Approach, the DAPA pilot. So that's continuing its good efforts despite some staff retention issues. There have been some encouraging signs around the number of stalking prevention orders increasing, and there is a linked 3-month pilot where a police staff investigator is supporting officers in obtaining civil orders. And finally, and encouragingly, just picking out the sort of the statistic at the end, that the number of young people aged between 10 and 17 entering the criminal justice system has continued to fall, which has been an ambition of the whole partnership. We have a figure lower than both the Eastern and the national figures. But yes, very quick headlines, and I welcome the questions.
You've actually answered the question I was going to answer, which was about the DAPA approach. So I won't dwell there. I mean, the one thought that flashed across my mind as you were speaking is how much of this is dependent on grant funding rather than in-house consistent funding. Is there any fragility in the provision of what are currently very successful programmes?
So across a number of pilots, there's different answers to different questions. So yes, there are some where we are having to work through how this will be sustained funding going forwards. Hence the use of the word pilots, and we are evaluating very carefully to see how that will get balanced through into next year's budgets.
Thank you. Anything else on that item? Pillar 5, supporting victims.
Back to me, Commissioner, albeit some of the ground in this paper has already been covered elsewhere. The highlights we've mentioned a few times this morning, the dashboards that we've completed, that we've established that better enable us to understand the performance that's taking place in force. We're now able to provide more detail on how we're better supporting victims than perhaps we were when we first took office, because that information is now available to hand, more scrutiny, more accuracy, and the figures are there for everyone to read. We continue to upskill our staff. Presentations have been delivered to leaders, managers, around how they use this dashboard to drive better compliance, and I think we will only see improvements as we roll those dashboards out. More generally, in terms of investigations, our team, Operation Investigate, continue to develop training days for frontline officers. I think that detection rate we referred to earlier is probably the best indicator of success we could have on that. I know that this is about supporting victims, but all of the victims who are being supported on justice. So I think solving the crime is the best way of doing that. A part of our success has been the establishment of our converter team, who have achieved 200 positive outcomes of crimes by re-engaging with offenders and identifying further criminality amongst them.
Just sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to understand: is this a one-off pilot, or is this now going to be a sustained approach? Because it does seem to be paying off.
It touches upon the last question that you raised, actually, Commissioner. So it's a team that we have funded for this year. We will do our utmost to keep funding for next year, but there are a number of cost pressures facing force. But we are always going to prioritise crime and the solving of crime. So I'm quite sure that there'll be a fixture moving forward. But
resource is a theme that is writ large on a lot of these reports.
Absolutely. We get out what we put in. One area, again linked actually, one area of significant pressure for us when it comes to supporting victims and witness is the workload of our victim witness care team. You'll be very familiar with that team, but they are too regularly having to contact victims or witnesses of crime to tell them that court hearings are being rescheduled at short notice. The backlog in the criminal justice system is falling upon policing to support through the management of the victims and witnesses. It's an area where we've had to grow and increase the size of the team on a temporary basis, but you'll be aware that all of the projections around court recovery are suggesting that recovery won't occur for a number of years yet. So in the meantime, it's left to policing to pick up the extra demands associated with that. The team who work in our victim, the staff, who work in our victim and witness care team are fantastic. They are doing an incredibly challenging job, but they are really under pressure because of those court backlogs.
I did at the last local criminal justice board ask the regional director of the Courts and Tribunal Service to go back and see whether there was funding from them to support the additional burden that victims, victim care unit was doing. You know, we're carrying their financial risk, if you like, and it's not unreasonable that they should contribute. Past correspondence suggests that we shouldn't hold our breath, but the regional director totally got where we were coming from and will do his best.
Well, Commissioner, I appreciate the support on that. This is a, of course, we'll always support victims, but and I apologise for monetising it. However, it is a significant cost pressure being placed on policing because of a delay elsewhere in the system. And we therefore have to redirect resources from somewhere else to deal with this. In terms of the paper itself, though, I think I've covered all of the main highlights and happy to answer any questions you might have.
I think I've actually asked my questions as we've gone through. Yes, so let's get one of us. Yeah, anything else from the floor?
Okay.
Final pillar, stronger, safer communities.
Back with DCC on this one, please.
Yes, thank you. If I may, as always, assuming the paper's been read, may I just highlight a couple of points on this one, please? The new, relatively new commercial vehicle unit, with the paper highlights the work the commercial vehicle unit's been doing, and again, without mentioning money too much, but funded through the State Cameron Partnership, exactly the way that allocated money should be being spent, have been reinvested in road safety. The team, absolutely infused team, provide that specialist knowledge and investigative capability around commercial vehicles, having again run numerous activity days, you know, those action days that we particularly focus on here in Norfolk, very much part of it. We now are, not only are we doing action days where we're pulling lots of lorries over and doing all the necessary checks, but they're out on the roads day in, day out, looking for, using intelligence and looking for those rogue hauliers and or criminality. So we know that from a killed and seriously injured, that we've seen an uptick in haulage or commercial vehicles being party to those numbers. So clearly this is our response around keeping our roads safe. And the commercial vehicle unit also, because of the way that they use intelligence and are linked into our wider intelligence environment, are being used to disrupt serious and organised criminality, that sort of drug trafficking, human trafficking, the sorts of things that sometimes would almost be hidden in plain sight. Now we've got the expertise, the confidence and the right levels of equipment and skills, we are now making having a particularly good impact, and the paper highlights some of their activity. And the second point I'd just like to raise, that I think referenced in here, and if it's not here, it's somewhere else, but I still want to raise the point. We in Norfolk, the Chief's mentioned some very good performance, but we haven't mentioned that actually we have the lowest burglary rate in the country, overall burglary, and we have the lowest residential burglary rate in the country. And again, that comes back to some of the points being raised before around making sure that we have a safe and strong community. That goes back to a lot of that work that the Chief's referenced, whether it's the Converter team going back to and ensuring that burglars account for their previous activities, and also the work that we've done around the preventative, making sure that we harm, particularly whether it's vulnerable or repeat victims of burglary, that we are very much tied up in that space. But I just wanted to raise that, again, another highlight about the kind of performance environment is that burglary.
No, thank you. And in a similar vein, I'm looking at the table on page 81, and hate crime. Encouraging to see the increased solved activities, 32% up in the last 12 months, 22.7% against the long-term average.
Yes, again, that's both around focus and making sure that we don't let those just slip by and become part of the background. We focus very, very vigorously on hate crime data. It's looked at daily. We put it to a team that consider that. Anything that raises concerns, that's fed back into the district command team and ensure that gets that onto their radar. We ensure continually that we monitor community tensions to make us aware of the impact that these sorts of crimes have. We monitor events. I know we probably haven't mentioned it, but protest events over the weekend. We clearly had a protest and a counter protest. That adds to the pressure sometimes on parts of our community. Some of this is seasonal, not least because a lot of significant portion of hate crime happens in the public space. So as you move through the winter, the late autumn, winter and early spring, fewer people in the public space. We clearly see a slight drop, and as more people are out and about, more people are interacting, you see it start to go up. But it's one of those areas we understand and fully appreciate the impact it has on individuals, and therefore we don't tolerate it. We take it very firmly.
And we've addressed the learning that came out of the Miller case. I think was it Yorkshire homicide? Can't remember exactly where Mr. Miller challenged a non-crime hate incident.
Yes. So again, we were only talking about this at the IAG, the Independent Advisory Group, yesterday with another presentation. Of course, that when we talk here, we're talking about crimes. So what I've given is that. So when it impacts on the statute, with a hate element that's written in, that's a crime, and we will deal with crime. The point that you make in relation to the Miller case was the non-discriminatory incidents, where we now bring into, I think it's Article 10, freedom of expression, and quite properly balance people's freedom to express themselves relative to the impact it has on individuals. There's always a balance point around this, but quite from where we started from, which was actually from the McPherson report, talked about non-crime hate incidents, non-crime discriminatory incidents. We would take it purely from the perception of the recipient victim. We've now started on the basis of the case law, recalibrated that balance. That's taken some time for our organisation to move, but again, let me be clear here: it's having an impact, and it's a crime. It will be raised as a crime, and it will be investigated as a crime.
Thank you. Anything else on that pillar? Anything on the board? Into item 11, emerging operational risks. Is there anything that we haven't talked about you want to flag?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of ground this morning, Commissioner, so I think we've covered it all. Thank you.
Yeah. Nothing from the floor. Item 12, any other business? I think I'm getting subtle hints here. Finally, item 13, dates of future scrutiny meetings. They are on the agenda. I just flagged that the Police and Crime Panel meeting on the 17th of July has come out for a variety of reasons. It looks like there will be a panel meeting on the 1st of September, which will take the papers from the 17th of July and just do them very late. And then there will be the scheduled meeting on the 30th of October that will take annual reports, just so everyone's clear on that. But the other meetings are shown there. So I think I can wrap up the meeting basically by thanking everyone that's contributed, either in answers at the table or in reports written prior to the meeting. Chief, can I thank you and your team for very comprehensive answers to everything. Really grateful. And on that happy note, I shall close the meeting. Can you confirm recording has stopped?